I stood in my father's study, surrounded by mahogany and leather and the smell of old cigars, holding up a small sealed envelope, while my brothers received everything. The attorney's voice droned on, clinical and precise, reading from papers that decided our fates. Preston got the shipping companies, three of them, worth millions. Landon got the ranch, 500 acres of prime land with horses and cattle. Then came the cars, a vintage Rolls-Royce for Preston, a Ferrari for Landon, a Mercedes for their future use. I waited. Surely something was coming for me. Surely my father hadn't forgotten his third son completely. And to Daniel Carter, the attorney finally said, and I straightened in my chair, "I leave the contents of the sealed envelope marked with his name." That was it. That was everything. Preston laughed first. Not a small chuckle, but a full belly laugh that echoed off the walls. Landon joined in, not even trying to hide his contempt. I felt my face burn as I took the envelope from the attorney's outstretched hand. Across the desk, my mother sat stone-faced, her expression blank as if I wasn't even in the room. Uncles and cousins and distant relatives I barely knew all stared at me with mixtures of pity and amusement. "Dad's final joke," Preston said, wiping his eyes. "Classic." "Maybe there's a lottery ticket inside," Landon added, "or a coupon for a free coffee." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a weathered map, the paper old and soft like fabric, with faded ink markings leading to somewhere called Whitehaven Bay. There was also a golden key attached to a small tag. The address read, 272 Lighthouse Road. Nothing else, no letter, no explanation, just these two items that made no sense. "What is it?" Preston leaned forward, suddenly curious. I held up the map silently. The laughter started again. Louder this time. "A treasure map. Oh, this is perfect. Dad really did have a sense of humor after all." "Maybe it leads to his secret stash of dad jokes," Landon said. "The only thing Daniel was ever going to inherit anyway." I folded the map carefully and stood. Nobody tried to stop me as I left the study. Nobody said goodbye. I walked through the mansion I grew up in, past family photos on the walls that always seemed to feature three family members more prominently than the fourth, past Preston's football trophies and Landon's academic awards, past the formal living room where I was rarely allowed as a child because I might break something valuable. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the smallest room in the house, tucked in a corner that guests never saw. While my brothers had suites with their own bathrooms and sitting areas, I had a single room barely bigger than a closet. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that material things weren't important, that I was better than them because I didn't need luxury. But sitting on my narrow bed, looking at this mysterious map, I realized I'd been lying to myself for 28 years. It did matter. Every slight mattered. Every missed graduation, every forgotten birthday, every Christmas where my gifts came wrapped in leftover paper while theirs came in expensive boxes with elaborate bows. It all mattered, and it all hurt. I studied the map under my desk lamp. The route was hand-drawn, leading from somewhere south up the coast to Whitehaven Bay, over 400 miles north. My father's handwriting marked certain spots, though I couldn't read most of the faded words. The paper itself was old, maybe 30 years old, judging by its yellowed edges and soft texture. This wasn't created recently. My father had carried this map, kept this secret, for decades. The golden key felt warm in my palm, heavier than it should be for its size. What did it open? What was at 272 Lighthouse Road? And why would my father leave me this instead of anything else? Below, I heard Preston and Landon breaking open expensive champagne, celebrating their inheritance. Their voices carried through the floorboards, loud and triumphant. They'd gotten everything they wanted, everything they expected, while I sat alone with a map and a key and more questions than answers. But something in my gut told me this wasn't a joke. My father, despite everything, despite the distance, despite the coldness, despite treating me like a stranger in my own family, was never cruel. Whatever this map led to meant something. It had to. At 2 in the morning, I made my decision. I packed a bag with clothes and toiletries. I grabbed the map and the key. I walked quietly down the stairs and out the front door, leaving behind the sound of my brother's laughter and my mother's silence and the only home I'd ever known. I didn't know what I'd find in Whitehaven Bay, but I knew I had to find out why my father's final act was to send me away. The highway stretched endlessly before me, my sedan's engine rattling in rhythm with my thoughts. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, following the route marked on my father's map. The first 100 miles passed in a blur of rest stops and fluorescent gas stations, the kind of places where truckers drank bad coffee at 3 in the morning and nobody asked questions. As dawn broke over the mountains, I pulled into a diner somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The place smelled like bacon grease and burnt toast. I slid into a corner booth and spread the map on the table, tracing the route with my finger. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile approached with coffee. "You look lost, honey," she said, filling my cup without asking. I opened my mouth to say I wasn't lost, but the words died in my throat. Was I lost? I was following a map to a place I'd never heard of, chasing answers my father never gave me while he was alive. Maybe lost was exactly what I was. "Just traveling," I finally said. She nodded like she understood, and left me alone with my coffee and my confusion. The map led me away from major highways, onto smaller roads that wound through towns time forgot. I passed abandoned factories with broken windows, main streets with more empty storefronts than open ones, houses with peeling paint and overgrown yards. It felt deliberate, like my father had chosen this specific route through America's overlooked places. But why? What was he trying to show me? I tried calling my mother twice. Both times, it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? Why did Dad treat me differently my entire life? Why did you never tell me the truth? I didn't even know what truth I was looking for yet. Around noon, I called Preston. His voicemail was full. Of course it was. He was probably too busy making plans for his new companies to bother with his strange little brother and his mysterious inheritance. The isolation wrapped around me like a blanket. I'd always felt alone in my family, but now that feeling was physical, miles and miles of empty road between me and everyone I'd ever known. Maybe this was the point. Maybe my father wanted me to understand that I'd always been separate, always been different, always been the outsider looking in. By the second night, I could smell salt in the air. I was getting close to Whitehaven Bay. I found a cheap motel near the coast, the kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls. I carried my bag and the map inside, spread everything on the faded bedspread, and really looked at the map for the first time since leaving. There were details I'd missed before. Tiny notes in the margins written in my father's precise handwriting. Numbers that might be coordinates. Symbols I didn't recognize. The paper was definitely old 25, maybe 30 years old, based on how it felt in my hands. This wasn't something my father created recently. This map had history. This secret had been carried for decades. My mind drifted to memories I usually kept locked away. I was 10, walking into the garage late one night to ask my father something I can't even remember now. He was sitting in his car with the door open, and he was crying. Actually crying. I'd never seen him cry before or since. When he saw me, he wiped his eyes quickly and told me to go back to bed. His voice was sharp, angry even, like I'd caught him doing something shameful. I remembered being 18, my birthday, when my father handed me an envelope personally instead of having my mother give it to me. Inside was just a newspaper clipping about a shipwreck from 1972. No card, no explanation, just this yellow piece of newspaper about a ship that went down off the coast. I'd kept it in a drawer for years, confused about what it meant, until I eventually forgot about it. Now I wished I'd paid more attention. Now I wondered if that clipping was another piece of this puzzle I was only beginning to see. I lay on the motel bed, listening to the ocean in the distance. Tomorrow I'd reach Whitehaven Bay. Tomorrow I'd find 272 Lighthouse Road. Tomorrow I'd use the golden key and hopefully get some answers. But tonight, I was suspended between my old life and whatever came next. Tonight, I was alone with questions that had haunted me for 28 years. Why was I different? Why did my father keep me at arm's length while showering attention on Preston and Landon? Why did my mother look through me instead of at me? The map sat on the nightstand, its secrets still hidden. The golden key gleamed in the lamplight. Somewhere ahead of me, in a quiet coastal town I'd never heard of before 3 days ago, my father had left me something. Not money, not property, something else. I fell asleep wondering if I was ready to find out what it was. Whitehaven Bay appeared through morning fog like something from a dream. Victorian houses lined streets named after ships. Starboard Lane, Anchor Avenue, Maritime Drive. The harbor held fishing boats that bobbed gently in the water, and a single lighthouse stood on the northern point like a sentinel. Seagulls cried overhead, and the ocean stretched gray and infinite before me. I drove slowly through the small town, following the map's final markings. Everything felt frozen in time here, like the world outside had kept moving, but Whitehaven Bay had decided to stay in some earlier, simpler era. Old men sat outside a bait shop, drinking coffee from thermoses. A woman swept the sidewalk in front of a bookstore that looked like it had been there for 100 years. Then I saw it, a brass plate on an old brick building. Whitmore and Associates, Maritime Law. The address from the key tag. My heart hammered as I pulled to the curb. Through the window, I could see an elderly man sitting at a desk. He looked up as my car stopped, and even from a distance, I saw recognition flash across his face, like he'd been waiting, like he knew I would come. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. This was it. Whatever my father had left me, whatever secret he'd kept, the answers were inside that building. Once I walked through that door, everything would change. I'd never be able to go back to not knowing. Finally, I grabbed the envelope with the map and key and got out. The bell above the door chimed as I entered. The office smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. Maritime maps covered every wall. Model ships sat on shelves and filing cabinets, detailed and perfect. The man stood immediately. "You look just like him," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been waiting 28 years to meet you, Daniel Carter." The words hit me like a physical blow. 28 years. My exact age. This was planned before I was even born. "Who are you?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted. "Bernard Whitmore. I was your father's closest friend." He gestured to a leather chair worn smooth by time. "Please, sit. We have a great deal to discuss." I sat because my legs felt weak. He offered tea, and I accepted it with trembling hands, not because I wanted tea, but because I needed something to hold. "Your father and I met in college," Whitmore began, settling into his own chair. "We served together in the Coast Guard in the early 70s. He saved my life once during a rescue mission. I've been holding certain documents in trust ever since, waiting for this day." "What day?" I asked. "What is this place? Why did my father send me here?" Whitmore studied me with sharp blue eyes that had clearly seen decades of secrets. "Because you had to choose to come." Victor was very specific about that. "You could have thrown the envelope away. You could have stayed angry and bitter about what you didn't receive. But you came. That tells me you're ready." He pulled out an old file box with my father's name on a label. Inside were photographs I'd never seen before. My father as a young man in a Coast Guard uniform, looking vibrant and alive in a way I never saw growing up. My father standing next to a beautiful woman with dark curly hair in front of a lighthouse. My father holding a baby wrapped in a blanket I recognized from storage at home, but never understood. Your father loved someone before he married your mother, Whitmore said quietly. Her name was Catherine Morrison. She was a lighthouse keeper's daughter here in Whitehaven Bay. The room tilted. I set down my teacup before I dropped it. They met when Victor was stationed here. They fell deeply in love. They planned to marry. Whitmore's voice was gentle but firm, delivering truth like medicine. But Victor's father intervened. The Carter family was old money, connected, powerful. Catherine was nobody. Victor's father threatened to disown him, to destroy Catherine's reputation, to make sure Victor never worked in shipping again. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The photographs blurred in front of me. Your father made a choice. He regretted every day of his life. Whitmore continued. He left Catherine and married Evelyn, a woman from an appropriate family. He built his empire. He had Preston and Landon. He did everything his father demanded. And Catherine? I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer. She discovered she was pregnant after Victor left. She never told him. She raised you alone for 2 years in a cottage by the lighthouse. Whitmore paused, his expression heavy with sadness. Then she got sick. Cancer. She was dying, and she knew it. That's when she contacted Victor. The baby in the photograph. The blanket I recognized. The lighthouse visible through this very window. That baby, I said, my voice breaking. That's me. Whitmore nodded slowly. Yes, Daniel. Catherine Morrison was your mother. Your real mother. The world stopped making sense. Every truth I'd built my life on crumbled like sand. Evelyn wasn't my mother. My father had abandoned the woman he loved, and I was the child born from that abandoned love. Victor came back when Catherine called. Whitmore continued, his voice steady and sure. He held her hand when she died in the hospital. You were 2 years old in the room, though you wouldn't remember. Catherine's last wish was that Victor raise you, protect you, give you the life she couldn't. She made him promise. I thought of Evelyn's cold stare at the will reading, the way she'd looked through me my entire life like I was invisible. She wasn't my mother. She was the woman forced to raise her husband's illegitimate child as punishment for his betrayal. He brought you home and told Evelyn everything, Whitmore said. She agreed to raise you, but on her terms. No favoritism, no acknowledgement of what you represented. You would be a Carter in name only. Everything made sense now. The distance, the coldness, the feeling that I was always a guest in my own home because I was never supposed to be there. I was the living reminder of my father's greatest failure and Evelyn's greatest humiliation. Why didn't he just tell me? The question came out raw and desperate. Why let me grow up thinking I was worthless? Whitmore stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. 'Cause he was a coward about some things and brave about others. He couldn't face his wife's anger or explain to his legitimate sons why you were different, but he also couldn't let you go through life not knowing who you really were. He turned back to me. So he built something for you. Something that would explain everything when you were ready to understand. Built what? Whitmore smiled. The first real smile I'd seen since arriving. Come with me. I need to show you what your father spent 26 years creating in your mother's name. We drove through Whitehaven Bay in his car, my mind spinning too fast to process everything. Catherine Morrison, my real mother. A woman I never knew, but who loved me for 2 years before cancer took her away. A woman who watched the ocean from a lighthouse and raised me alone and then died begging my father to protect me. Whitmore pulled up to a large modern building I hadn't noticed when I first arrived. The sign made my heart stop. Catherine Morrison Maritime Institute and Rescue Training Center. My mother's name. in gold letters, on a building that looked important and permanent and real. "What is this?" I whispered. "Your inheritance," Whitmore said simply. Inside, the facility was impressive. Classrooms with modern equipment, a library filled with books on oceanography and marine biology, offices with computers and maritime charts. Student projects lined the hallways, research on coral reefs, sustainable fishing, ocean cleanup. Everything was professional and clean, and clearly well-funded. "Your mother cared deeply about the ocean," Whitmore explained as we walked. "She spent her life at that lighthouse watching ships, learning about the sea, rescuing sailors in trouble. After she died, your father was destroyed. He'd chosen money over love, and it cost him everything that mattered." We stopped at a wall of photographs. In the center hung a large portrait of Catherine Morrison. I stared at my own eyes looking back at me from her face. My nose, my smile. She was beautiful and strong, with an expression that suggested intelligence and kindness. "So he made a different choice," Whitmore continued. "He built this institute in her name. He funded it entirely from his shipping profits. For 26 years, he's been pouring money into this place. Scholarships for students who can't afford college, rescue equipment for the Coast Guard, research grants for marine scientists." I walked through the building in a daze. A plaque listed major donors. Victor Carter's name was first, with a number that made my breath catch. $43 million donated over the decades. Whitmore led me to an office with a nameplate on the door. "Director currently vacant, reserved for D. Morrison Carter." My name. My mother's last name combined with the Carter name I'd always carried uncomfortably. "The Institute is fully funded in perpetuity," Whitmore said, opening files of legal documents. "It will never want for money, but it needs a director with the Morrison name. It needs you, Daniel. This is your inheritance. Not money or businesses or cars. Something more important: purpose. Your mother's life work, continued. Your father's redemption, completed." I sank into the director's chair. Through the window, I could see the lighthouse where my mother lived, where she raised me for 2 years. I couldn't remember. Where she watched the ocean and dreamed of my future. My father gave Preston and Landon wealth they'd probably waste, but he gave me something that required choice, presence, and commitment. "There's more," Whitmore said softly. Whitmore placed another document on the desk. "The cottage where you lived with Catherine. Your father bought it and the surrounding 3 acres. He restored it exactly as it was when your mother was alive. Her books are still on the shelves, her paintings still on the walls. He preserved everything." I opened the document with shaking hands. Property deed. Catherine Morrison's cottage and land, transferred to Daniel Morrison Carter on the date of Victor Carter's death. Market value listed at over $2 million. But the value wasn't in money. It was in memory, in identity, in finally knowing where I came from. "He couldn't raise you with those memories because of Evelyn," Whitmore said, "because of the life he'd chosen. But he made sure it would all be waiting for you." My throat tightened. All those years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, and my father had been maintaining a place where I belonged completely. A place that held my history, my mother's love, my true identity. "There's one more thing," Whitmore said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is from your father. He wrote it a month before he died. He knew his heart was failing." He placed it in my hands and squeezed my shoulder. "Read it when you're ready. I'll give you privacy." He walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, and Daniel? Your father wanted me to tell you something specific when you arrived. 6 words, he said, would matter most." I looked up at him, waiting. Whitmore's eyes glistened. "You are the son I chose." The words hung in the air between us. Preston and Landon were born into Victor's life by obligation and family expectation. But me? I was the son he traveled 400 miles to claim. the son he built a legacy for, the son he loved enough to set free from the toxic Carter family dynamics. After Whitmore left, I sat alone in the office, my office now, and opened my father's letter with trembling hands. His precise handwriting filled 3 pages, but I skipped to the end first, needing to know his final words. You were always my greatest achievement. I went back to the beginning and read everything. He described meeting Catherine, falling in love with a depth he never felt again. He described the pressure from his family, the threats, the impossible choice. He described the emptiness of his marriage to Evelyn, the hollow success of his business empire, how Preston and Landon became exactly what his own father had been, entitled and cruel. Then he wrote about the day Catherine contacted him, dying. I held you that night, Daniel, and you looked at me with Catherine's eyes, and I knew I'd destroyed the best thing in my life. I couldn't undo leaving her, but I could protect you. I could build something meaningful. I could make sure her memory lived on. He explained Evelyn's condition for taking me in, that he never show me favoritism, never acknowledge publicly what I represented. I know I hurt you. Every cold moment, every missed event, every time I chose them over you, I saw the pain in your eyes and it destroyed me. But I had made promises. He wrote about secret visits to Whitehaven Bay, sitting in Catherine's cottage, funding scholarships in her name. I would walk the beach where we used to walk and apologize to her over and over for my weakness. And I would dream of the day you'd come here and understand that everything I did wrong, I tried to make right through this place. The letter revealed his deliberate choice to divide his estate, as he did. Preston and Landon value only wealth and power. They'll probably destroy what I built. That's fine. Let them have it. But you're Catherine's son. You value different things. Teaching, helping others, finding meaning beyond money. I watched you become exactly who your mother was. That's why I saved the real inheritance for you. Tears streamed down my face as I read about the trust fund he'd established to support me, the scholarships in my name for future teachers, the cottage fully paid for and maintained. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't, he wrote near the end. Choose the meaningful life over the easy one. Choose to honor your mother by continuing her work. Choose to be brave where I was cowardly. The Institute needs someone who cares about more than profit. Those students need someone who believes in them. That community needs someone who understands what Catherine understood, that the ocean and the people who depend on it deserve protection and respect. I looked out at the view my mother must have seen every day. I thought about my small apartment, my teaching job that barely paid rent, my brothers celebrating their inheritance of things that would never make them happy, and I thought about the choice before me now.